I'm 13 years old. My grandma died when I was 3 or 4. My parents, older brothers, and I lived in the same house as my grandparents and for some time my aunt. Basically, my mom's childhood home. Anyway, as I said, my grandma died. She died from a liver problem. What the problem was, I'm not sure. I do not remember my grandma, only that her hair was dyed red. We don't have pictures of her, at least not that I know of. My memory is pretty bad, but this one dream stuck with me. I was 5 and had a pretty bad nightmare. The nightmare went like this. I'm seeing myself, watching as a black hooded thing is giving my grandma a tea. My grandma drank the tea and just moments later dropped unconscious on the floor. A flash, and I'm watching my grandmother lying in a hospital bed, hearing the heart monitor. My grandma still unconscious. I watched as a doctor injected something in my grandma's arm. The thing is pitch black. I watched my grandma's body slowly turn pitch black. As I said, I don't remember her, so I just remember her faceless body slowly going black. Next thing I hear is the heart monitor signaling that my grandma's heart stopped. That's where the dream ends. I wake up. This dream left me so terrified of injections that even when I had to get that shot every 6-year-old does, as they told me, my parents had to hold me down. I was kicking, screaming so much. Last year in 7th grade, I had to get HIV and other medical shots, and needless to say, I had full-blown panic attacks. Each and every time. My classmates had to calm me down just so I would somewhat stay still while getting them. When I had to get blood drawn from me, I didn't have a panic attack, but was still terrified. Honestly, I really think that no one gets this. When I talked about being scared of being shot by someone, the only thing they would say is, "Why are you scared?" It's like a mosquito bite. You don't have to be scared. It doesn't hurt. I would get this even after I tell someone that it's not the needle, nor the pain that scares me. So I came here to see if anyone has a similar experience or fear. In Mexican folklore, there's a story of a dismembered, hairy hand that will tickle misbehaving children who don't go to sleep when they're told to. Essentially, it's a boogeyman, do what parents say monster. There's probably several variations, but this is what I grew up with. When I was 3, I was sleeping on the bottom bunk and awoke to someone tapping my right hand. There were 2 large drawers where my sister and I kept all of our toys beneath the bed. Whatever was tapping me was coming from the drawer under me. Before I opened my eyes, I just felt this frantic or enthusiastic tapping on my hand. I remember the slapping sound too. My parents would leave the hallway lights on to help my sister and I sleep comfortably, so I saw what was waking me up viscerally. I opened my eyes and saw this large hand curved up from beneath my bottom bunk, slapping my hand. Imagine man hands from Seinfeld. It was green, like the colour of pea soup. It had black hair on the back of its hand that travelled up to its fingers. The fingernails were also green, though short. Maybe it got a mani before visiting me. Its skin was really dry. I distinctly remember how coarse the skin felt. When I started moving my hand, it almost looked like it was signalling to me. It looked like it was signalling Y in ASL. I have no idea what that would even translate to in dismembered hand language, but I remember it moving its fingers and hand like it was trying to tell me something. I squealed, shut my eyes, and shoved my hand under the pillow. I started screaming frantically for my parents and could hear my sister shifting above me. Both my parents ran in, and I'm obviously inconsolable. My dad told me it was just him teasing me, and then my memory of the rest of the night stops there. The next morning at breakfast, I was eating pancakes with my family. I asked why Dad was playing a prank on me and tapping my hand from under the bed. My parents tensely looked at each other and changed the subject. I feel like I'll never have an answer to what I experienced. The rest of my arm was covered by my blanket, so my one theory is that it thought I was another severed hand. Is that even possible? For years as a kid, I thought I saw it a couple of times. and then it would run around with other hands, pure black, pure white. Those might have been nightmares. I started dreaming then about being tickled and suffocated by several hands and feet. Sounds almost comical, but fuck, it was terrifying. What's wild to me is that my cousin, who was the same age as me, also experienced a severed green hand chasing her up the basement steps until she shut the door on it. I also have a friend who, without knowing anything about my experience, told me his cousin saw a green, dismembered hand trying to coax her into her bedroom closet late at night. She was about 3 or 4 at the time. Was there something in the air in the 90s? During this quarantine, my wife and I have watched a lot of YouTube videos about scary stories. Then, she said a day or so ago that I should tell my ghost ex-girlfriend story here. Let me start by saying I do not truly believe in the paranormal, but she has mixed feelings about it, and the story of the ghost ex is one that could make some believe in such. I'll give some backstory, then get to the juicy bits. So in high school, I had a bad case of the ugly duckling syndrome. I was short and fat most of my life, but shot up and started to play some sports and was a very tall and muscular teen. I often get confused as an adult. So everyone around me was aware of this, except myself. One particular young girl was quite chatty with me, but I was young and dumb and oblivious to her flirting. It stayed that way all the way up to graduation. Once we did graduate, we stayed in touch via Facebook, and she invited me to her birthday party. I invited my best friend at the time to come with me. I admitted to him that I was attracted to the young girl, but had no idea how to say so to her. So he decided to wingman it for me and give me some assistance. As the party goes on, he tosses hints and such, and towards the end, when everyone was beginning to leave, he saw a shot and faked getting a phone call to excuse himself and give her and I a chance to talk in private. Long story short, I gathered the courage to ask her out, and she didn't skip a beat and said yes. The only downside was that she was leaving town with her family, and we'd be back in a few days. When she came back, we'd meet and have our first date. I was happy, and she seemed to be as well. Sad part is that a few days pass, and I hear nothing from her on the day she was supposed to return. Then the next day, I get a group message that had something along the lines of, her name, be strong, you can make it through this, and other inspirational things. Turns out on her way back from her family vacation, the axle of the car snapped, and there was a bad crash. In the end, the mother was the only one to survive, while her children, and I believe the father, passed. It was quite a depressing halt to my potential first serious relationship. After the funeral service, I kind of moved on and thought nothing of it, moved on with my life. It had lots of ups and lots of downs, typical learning to be an adult. Then once I had my own place and began to date again, I realised I had quite a few night terrors now and again. They always seemed to coincide with the start and end of a relationship. So I always thought, still do, it was me stressing myself out about the pressure of no longer being single, or being newly single. This continued till I met my wife. Again, the start of a relationship, the night terror happened. Then the relationship keeps going and going and going. So once we began talks of marriage, I had an odd dream. It's the young girl from high school, only she's not aged, and I came across her at a party. In the dream, I'm fully aware that she's dead. I walk right up to her and touch her, thinking I'm imagining her. I talk to others around me in the dream and ask me if they can see her, and they all can see her clear as day. I'm beginning to get a bit loud and start yelling, "You can't be here, you're dead." She calmly tells me she's not and touches my face, and boom, I wake up, frozen. Can't move, can't speak, and I swear I just heard my door open and close. After about 30 seconds, I go full Kill Bill and start from my big toe and get the rest of my body back on track. Get up, grab a bat I have stashed by my bed and a knife and a dresser, and go see what the hell was going on outside. I see no one, and nothing is missing, and the door is locked. So I go to my one-stop shop on who has been in and out of my place. My cross-dressing neighbour across the street, who is, as always, in his car gossiping on the phone in the middle of the night. He saw nothing, so I went back home and told my future wife I had a bad dream and would tell her more the next day. Next day comes, and my future wife is a bit blown away. She's never had a night terror and thinks it's super odd, and believes the dream is odd as well. I explain I have a couple, and the conversation goes back to our normal daily chit chat. Then, things got a bit odd in my apartment. A few days later, my lights in my hallway began to flicker. I think nothing of it, and know we're moving soon, so I take note of it and say I'll let the landlord know soon. Then the kitchen lights begin to do the same. I do the same, take a note of it, and figure I'll tell the landlord once my work week is over. Then my cats begin to behave oddly. All cats do the look into space thing, but mine began to do so at one point at the entrance to our room, pouring at nothing in the spot. Most of me think it's just cats being cats. My future wife is not a skeptic. Then begins the whole inside joke of the ghost ex-girlfriend. I see it as simply a joke. She does as well, but does not take it as lightly as me. I occasionally leave for work and say, "Bye babe, you and my ex have fun." We laugh and leave it at that. Then one day I leave and work a late shift when I come home well after midnight. When I return, she tells me about something odd. She said she was sitting in the living room reading a book, and the cats did the old look into the blank space, that space being towards our bedroom door. Then the dot goes, "Sorry, I'm not sure about that." An echo dot randomly saying that is nothing to me, but it's never happened to her. And that, as well as the cats doing the old ghost stare, got her a bit wound up. I still go, "Oh well, we'll be moving to a bigger place soon, and she'll be fine once she gets there." Fast forward to our new apartment. More room, cats can explore, and we both are in love with it. All is well, and we get it to set to our liking. Then I get to decorate my room, aka guest room, man cave, nerd heaven. A month or so and the damn cats are back at it again. However, the spot has changed. The blank stare spot is not directly above my computer desk where I spend most of my free time. I love PC games. In typical non-believer fashion, I think that they think the one little dot where paint splashed must look like a bug to the cats, and they're giving it the good old stare down. My now wife realizes it, and the joke is the ghost ex knows I'm there the most and likes to stare at me. By this time, my wife has asked her friends and co-workers about night terrors and realized it was not as rare as she thought, so she's less shocked by it. Now this is where things get super weird for her. I have a vacation planned. On the day I fly out, I must be at the airport at 5:30 a.m. So she drops me off and we say our goodbyes, and she heads back home to sleep more. When she gets in bed, she starts to doze off and then hears the door open and then close. She's religious about locking and latching doors, so this is awkward. Then the bedroom door opens and she's frozen stiff. Can't move and can't speak. She knows I'm well on my way to holiday, and if my flight was cancelled, I would call her and let her know. So when she finally can move, she wakes up. Turns out she was dreaming about having a night terror this whole time. Then to top it off, the cats are in the guest room doing their corner stare down, and the echo dot again says something without being spoken to. Am I crazy for continually just chalking this all up to coincidence? So my wife said I should share a quick story here, but didn't get round to it thanks to World of Warcraft. It's a drug, kids. Don't start it unless you can commit. My wife and I sat with some friends, and they asked me if I had any supposed supernatural accurateness happen to me in my lifetime. To which I replied, not really, but I've had some scary things happen that I thought were at first, then luckily, they turned out to just be weird happenings. The first being when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I was living in Upper Locker with my mom. Shit had gotten really bad with my mom's mental health, and she had lost her job and her house, and to the hood we went. It was not too bad, besides gunshots and drugs and bars on the windows. Perfect place for kids. I was also a nerdy fat kid, so that made school really fun. So time goes on living in the ghetto, and my mom gets a new doctor who begins to prescribe her new medication to help her condition. They kind of worked, but had an odd side effect of making her talk in her sleep a lot. I'm already on edge due to the unsafe living environment, and I always have a hard time sleeping. And now Mom has nonsensical conversations in her sleep now and again. One night, there's a horrible thunderstorm going on, so I get up to close the curtains so all the lightning will stop messing with me. This made the room completely dark. I got back in bed and began to doze off and then look towards the door. What I saw was insanely creepy. I saw the silhouette of a woman hunched over in my doorway, so I did what any kid would do. Slid the covers over my head and proceeded to internalize a serious panic attack. The next day, I asked my brother if he saw anything last night, and of course, he was out like a log and saw nothing. However, I didn't tell my mom because I know she's having a hard time, and a kid seeing folks in the dark might send her into a breakdown. She was very delicate back then. So being the skeptic I am, I just tell myself I saw nothing, and it was all in my head. Weeks go by, and I see nothing. So I relax and tell myself that I was right, and it was nothing. Then again, a bad storm hits. Just like last time, I got up and closed the curtains and looked at the doorway before I got back into bed. I see nothing and all is well. Then I pop in bed and drift off. Then I wake up to the same silhouette at the foot of the bed, hunched over, mumbling words. This time I'm like, fuck this, and throw the N64 controller at it. I hear a loud thud, and no, it's not a ghost, it's a person. My eyes adjust to the dark, and I see my mum pissed that a controller just clocked her in the eye. Turns out that in her group sessions, someone suggested religion as a therapy to her mental issues. So during storms when she couldn't sleep, she thought it was a good idea to walk to her kids' room and pray over them. The words I heard from her after my fastball pitch were anything but godly after that. Around 2003, I had a really rough day and was feeling upset. When I slept that night, I dreamed about a woman who looked extraordinarily familiar to me, as if I'd already known her from somewhere. And she kept appearing to me in dreams even to this day. She appears in several dreams per year. Here's where it gets paranormal though. Sometimes she would appear in a dream, and something which happened to me in that dream would happen to me in real life the next day. And sometimes she'd appear in dreams about the news before the events themselves happened. For example, I did not expect those Canadian Freedom Convoy protests at all. But this woman appeared in 2 dreams about huge lines of truckers blocking the highways and causing a massive fight before the convoy even existed. Other people are starting to notice it too, because I'm trying to collect evidence by keeping a public dream journal. Here are some examples of things that other people have told me might be predictions. Jennifer is not the only one, but she appears extremely frequently compared to most of the other ones. You don't need to agree with me yet, since most of these dreams are not extremely detailed or explicit. But there have been a few odd coincidences so far. But I know that she's given me real premonitions in the past, because I remember some of her predictions over the last couple decades were too precise and detailed for me to deny. I used to be skeptical of this stuff myself. It's been happening for decades, but I've been keeping a public journal for about 1 year so far. I'm not lying about this stuff, but since this community is dedicated towards this topic, please be open-minded. She also always urges me to be moral, humble, and judge others equally, and to be pacifist. And she also feels very euphoric to be around. Several other people have noticed these coincidences now, but I hope to provide more evidence later. Hopefully, some of it will be more detailed predictions. When I was younger, my family and I moved around a lot, and no matter where we went, we always had some kind of experience with the paranormal. One house we lived in messed not only with me, but my entire family up. We all experienced so many strange things in the house that we couldn't really explain. I was either 10 or 11 at the time, I think. We had just moved into this new house on one of our oldest streets in our town. It was built in 1877, and it just gives off a strange feeling. It was a huge 2-story house that used to be an apartment building at one point in time, and I think my mom said she ended up finding out it was a funeral parlour. Not too sure though. When we first moved in, I remember having this nightmare of being in the kitchen at the new house and being covered in cockroaches while my parents acted as if nothing was wrong. The dream, for my age, really messed me up. I'm going to explain the layout a bit, so bear with me. It will be helpful in understanding the stories. For being an older house, everything on the first floor really flowed. You could stand in the kitchen and see straight to the living room. The downstairs had a private office with its own bathroom and what could be a working kitchenette. A bedroom, main floor bath, kitchen, living and dining. There was also a very long hallway that ran beside the living and dining room that started at the front door and ended at the main floor bath. We never really used the main floor bath. I always felt super creeped out by it. It always made me feel secluded and like if something ever happened, no one would know. The bedroom on the first floor we had as a playroom for my younger brothers and me. It was also the access point for the main staircase that led from the playroom to the upstairs laundry to the basement. The hallway also had the door to the basement, which is where my brother lived. The second floor was made up of 4 bedrooms, laundry and bathroom. The staircase leads to the front door. It also had the attic door at the top on a small landing. My parents' and 2 younger brothers' rooms were at the front of the house, and mine and my sister's were at the back. The hallway was a huge area that led to my sister's room and laundry. My bedroom was connected to my sister's. Her room was actually a giant sun porch, with a glass-paned door that connected our rooms. We both had our own entrance from the hall though. Now, my room had 2 doors that were right next to each other that led to the hallway. I hated it. I always had one blocked off. All of the encounters or experiences happened between mine and my sister's room. Now, most of the experience happened upstairs and the basement. Not all of these stories are my own, but also my family's. I'm going to focus on the second floor experiences because there are way more. So a few of my experiences started off pretty cliche. I used to always have this creepy feeling if I was alone upstairs, like someone was watching or something bad was going to happen. The first weird, unexplained thing that happened, we all witnessed. I mentioned earlier that the attic door was at the top of the stairs. Well, my mom hated it. We went up there when we first moved in to see it, and we found the belongings of a woman who apparently used to live there. Now, the attic wasn't livable at all. It was filthy, smelled, had bats, and the wallpaper and paint was peeling. But there was a whole lifetime of photos of some ladies, even a birth certificate. There was even a small room up there that had a rocking chair in it. The landlord had no idea whose belongings they were either, and he didn't care to clean it out. My mum didn't like it at all because she got this really unsettling feeling when she would go up there. She made it a rule we weren't allowed up there, and I didn't take much convincing. Now, the attic door had only a little hook lock on it, and my mum would keep it locked. But every morning, it'd be unlocked. We were blamed for doing it, of course. We weren't necessarily well-behaved kids, but we swore we never unlocked it. It never failed to be unlocked. My mum even ended up barricading it after a while. Now, 2 things happened to me that I will never forget. Happened, I believe, after we started renovating. The first thing was when I was upstairs one day, playing with my dolls. I heard someone rattling my door handle on the door that wasn't blocked by my dresser. I brushed it off because one of my brothers was messing with me. I heard it again, so I decided to catch them. Now, it's important to add that the doors were about an inch or so off the ground, high enough for a kitten to squeeze under it. So I waited to see a shadow, but nothing. I even opened the door, and no one. I would have heard or seen someone leave. I went back to playing, but I was definitely freaked out. So all my attention was on the doors. That's when the other door handle started to shake, and it echoed against my dresser. I booked it out and ran downstairs. I was terrified, and I spent the rest of my afternoon downstairs. I'd like to mention that I don't remember seeing the handle itself move, only hearing it. The second thing that happened was after we started to peel off the paint in the hallway.
We found some really creepy old wallpaper under it. Keep in mind, after tearing off this paint and wallpaper, we all started experiencing a ton of things. Anyway, the bathroom upstairs was one of those really long ones. The sink and toilet were at the very end, and you had to step up to them. Now, it's a little blurry on how she was standing, but at the very end of it, my best friend and I both caught a little girl in a white dress standing at the end of the bathroom. We both saw it, and it's the only time I've ever seen a spirit. I never thought it was true, and always thought that my mind was just messing with me, until my sister told me something this past Thanksgiving. Now, my sister had a lot of experiences. She probably suffered the most. Her experiences started way earlier than ours did. My sister used to hear knocking on her hallway door. My older brother admitted to doing it at least once, but denies doing it after that. She said she would hear it all the time and it was consistent with the knocking. Then, soon after her door got permanently stuck so she couldn't use it and had to use the one that connected our rooms. My sister isn't someone who lies, so I do believe everything she's told me. The second thing that happened was one night she was laying in bed trying to sleep, with her back to the outside of the bed. That's when she heard clearly 2 little girls laughing behind her. That's why I believe what I saw in the bathroom was real. She said she was frozen in fear and couldn't move. There were way more that happened to her, but I can't quite remember them, so I don't want to go off my memory. I will add that nothing ever happened to us in any of the other rooms upstairs. My mom did hate the master bedroom and slept downstairs for the majority of us living there. This story is something that happened to my mom, youngest brother, my older brother, older sister, her husband, and 2 of their friends. My brother's bedroom was in the basement of the house. I'm not too sure if they had other experiences in the basement leading up to this, but regardless, it's definitely something that made me personally hate going into the basement. My mom and youngest brother were in the living room trying to go to bed, and then the rest of them were in my oldest brother's bedroom. I do want to add that on the door frame to my brother's bedroom, there were height markings for kids. I believe it was a boy and girl's height markings. I always found it super odd that they were there since it was a basement. We do know at one point it was an apartment building. There was no way a family lived in the basement though, due to the size and condition. It was late, around 10 or 11 p.m. My oldest brother's room was divided with a wall, making it look like a small apartment. He had a sheet as a door to the bedroom area. My brother was trying to go to bed, and the rest of them were hanging out in the living room area of his room. I think they said they were watching a movie and talking. Everyone in the basement kept hearing knocking from above them, like someone was taking a stick and knocking it on the floor to quiet them. My brother started to get really annoyed by it since he was trying to sleep. After a while of it happening, my brother went upstairs to tell whoever was knocking on the floor to stop. Once he got up there though, my mom started to yell at him to stop knocking on the ceiling. My brother said he was confused and explained that it had to have been her or my youngest brother, because they were also hearing it too. This really made everyone unnerved. Brushing it off though, my brother went back downstairs and tried to go to bed. I'm not sure if he told anyone what my mom had said right away. Fast forward a little later. My brother was back in bed trying to sleep, and the rest of them were still hanging out in the living area of his room. One of their friends had passed out. He didn't hear anything that happened next, and the other 3 were talking. Out of nowhere, they all heard 2 kids talking, boy and girl, outside the bedroom, and then they heard a faint siren and a blood-curdling scream. At this point, they all froze and started to stand up. My brother came from his bedroom and asked if they all heard that before he pulled the door open and started running for the stairs. The rest of them weren't far behind him. They all fought their way up the stairs. Once they got upstairs, they told my mom what happened and they all decided to chill upstairs for a while. The next story is something that happened to me. When my sister and I were younger, our parents bought us those life-sized Barbies. I used to love them so much, and when my sister got older, she gave me hers. I was beyond excited to have 2 now. I always had them by my windows standing up. After a while, I started to notice they had moved slightly. Not necessarily spots, but their arms were positioned differently and their heads turned. I was, of course, freaked out and ended up moving them to my closet. And then at some point, I had my dad put them in storage. We still have them, and I still don't like being around them. Now, this could have been one of my siblings messing with me, but either way, it was definitely creepy for a young me. Toward the end of living there, we all migrated to the front of the upstairs, and most of us kids refused to sleep anywhere else. So I'm now a 23-year-old guy, but at the time of the story, I was around 17. I was living with my brother and his girlfriend at the time, and we had just moved to a new house. When we moved in, I immediately wanted to have the room that was in the attic. It had very small stairs leading up to it, but it was private and it had windows. First thing I can remember from that place was when we entered the attic, there was a chair right in the center of the room and a hammer on top of the chair. Nothing else. We thought it was weird, but proceeded to make some jokes about how maybe it was a serial killer that lived there, etc. Our humor is a bit dark. After a while, I noticed there was some sort of hole in the wall that supposedly led to nowhere, although it was impossible to see the end of it, even with a flashlight. It was small, but every now and then at night, there'd be some weird noises coming from it. I just thought it was some small animals that lived there, like rats or something, which didn't bother me much. After a couple of weeks, I started noticing that I was having a lot more nightmares than usual, and would wake up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was watching me. Again, I disregarded it, thinking it was just my imagination. That was until we were all sitting in the living room, which happened to be right under my room. We heard footsteps coming from above us, which was odd since there wasn't anyone else in the house. When we went to check upstairs, there was nothing. No one. The same thing continued almost every day when we were in the living room. Heavy footsteps above us, coming from my room. One time, my brother decided to hit the ceiling of the living room to see what happened. We heard something or someone knocking back every time, but every time we'd check my room, it would stop and my room would be empty, with nothing or no one in there. Then one day, a friend of my brother's girlfriend came to our house. She quickly left, and she was very upset. She claimed she had the ability to hear certain things, and in that house, she could hear a man telling her to hurt her family. He would say that he wanted to hurt us and things like that. She refused to come back to our house after that, and I ended up still staying in that room until we moved out. Nothing bad really ever happened to me, and I didn't think much of it back then. But thinking about it now, it seems crazy to have slept in that room for about 2 years with something in there with me. We just moved to Arizona from Texas, and for the last few weeks, my wife has been saying our room, and particularly our walk-in closet, gives her the creeps at night. Like hair standing up on the back of her neck, and the need to run out of there when turning off lights. Then she says at night, it feels like someone is playing with her hair. I thought maybe it was me in my sleep, but she says I was facing the opposite direction. Who knows? One night, I went to go play in my basketball league at 8:30 p.m, and I started getting frantic texts that I needed to come home. She said as she was laying in bed, she heard a voice say, "Hey." She thought it might have been one of our kids, age 6 or 4, and she used her phone light to scan the room and it was empty. As soon as she laid back down, she felt and heard someone slap the bed next to her. I came home to calm her down and laughed the situation off, and said she probably dozed off and was dreaming. The next night, I went to bed late, around 11 p.m, and she was already asleep, and I went and sat in the bathroom. While I'm sitting there on my phone, there's a distinct knock on the bathroom door. I jumped up and opened the door. Nobody there. Life is in the dark. We definitely have a ghost. So this happened back in 2013 near Dallas, Texas. My wife went to bed around 10:30 p.m. after shutting down the house, locking doors, turning off lights, and setting our alarm. We lived in a brand new house, so barring being built on an Indian graveyard or something, we were as good as far as ghosts go. Or so I thought. At around 1 a.m., I woke up and saw that our living room light was on. There was no way we would have left it on, as it's connected to our room, and we leave the doors open for the dogs. So I reach over and check on my wife. She's dead asleep. So I wake her up and ask her if she'd gotten up and left the light on. She says no. Obviously, someone was in our house. I grabbed my gun and did a sweep of our house looking for a potential intruder. Nobody is in the house that didn't belong, and the alarm was still on. So obviously, it was a mistake, and somehow we forgot to turn the light off. I go back to bed, still feeling uneasy, with a little adrenaline rush. As I laid in bed trying to go back to sleep, I rolled back over and looked towards the doorway, and saw a large, black, shadowy figure. Instantly, I knew it wasn't human, so I didn't move and stayed staring at it. It slowly made its way over to my wife's side of the bed and stood over her, at least 7 feet tall, and I whispered to my wife, who's also trying to go back to sleep, and say, "Do you see that?" She whispers back, "Yes, what is it?" The shadow then slowly glided over to my side of the bed, and I'm paralyzed with fear. I have the blankets pulled up to my neck, and I'm closing my eyes praying, "God, protect me if this is a demon." Then slowly, I feel a pressure being placed on my body, as if my comforter transformed into a weighted blanket, and felt like a soft hug, not anything malignant, still terrifying. Then it was gone. My adrenaline disappeared and I was able to fall asleep shortly after. The next morning, I called my father, who lives about 1,500 miles away, to talk to him about this. He's always been my spiritual advisor, as he's been a church leader for many years, and someone I consider very spiritually attuned. So I asked him, "Dad, have you ever had a ghost visit you before? Do you believe in ghosts?" He was quiet and didn't answer for a bit and then asked me, "Why?" So I tell him the story, and he quietly listens to my story, then says, "Well, to answer your question, yes, I believe in spirits. And yes, I've had a ghost visit me. 2 nights ago, as a matter of fact, and I'm pretty sure I know who it was." Well, I was not expecting that answer, nor what he was about to tell me. I said, "Well, who was it?" He told me it was his father. I said, "What the hell? When did Grandpa die?" Then he went on to explain that he had just found out less than a week ago that my grandfather was not his real father, and that he was an illegitimate child from an affair that my grandmother had had back in that day. My grandmother had never told anybody before, and though my grandfather always suspected it, he had never confirmed that my father was his biological son or not. My dad said he had intended on protecting his mum's secret and not telling anybody. My father had found out when he was trying to collect DNA samples from his parents for ancestry genealogy purposes. When he had asked my grandma for a DNA sample, she started freaking out, asking why he wanted to do that. The guilt was finally too much for her, and she came clean and told him. When my father found out who this man was, he tried to track him down, only to find out he had only died a year earlier, and that he had kids of his own, but never had any grandkids. My dad's newly found half-brother and sister told him that he had always wanted grandchildren, but never had them from his kids. My father that night prayed to God to let his father know that he had another son and had grandchildren. So it would seem that my deceased grandfather decided to pay my father and me, his firstborn son, a visit from the afterlife. My mother had always warned me against using Ouija boards. She was only semi-religious, so I never understood why she was against it, until she told me the story about my uncle's experience with a Ouija board. When my uncle was 14, he was playing with a Ouija board with some friends at a sleepover. They played with the board, and nothing exciting happened, so they went to bed. In the middle of the night, my uncle decided that he would play by himself. While playing with the board, he started talking to something. He still to this day has no idea if it was a demon, spirit, or something darker. All he knew was this thing was named Psy. As he talked to the thing from the Ouija board, he thought it would be funny to ask it when he would die. Immediately, the planchet started moving aggressively across the board. The thing promised my uncle that it would personally kill him on his 35th birthday. My uncle didn't want anything else to do with it. He said goodbye and tried to salvage some sleep that night. Now, my grandmother is extremely religious, and when she found out about this story, she was furious. She didn't find out until about 20 years later. She probably would have taken him straight to a Presbyterian seminary to have him blessed or exorcised, even though the Presbyterian Church doesn't believe in it. Many years went by, and it became a distant memory, until my uncle's 35th birthday. It was a sunny day, which is an important thing to remember. It hadn't rained recently, and the roads in this Detroit suburb had been recently repaved. He was riding his motorcycle down the road to dinner when suddenly his motorcycle experienced some sort of strange malfunction. The bike ended up on top of his mangled body in a ditch on the side of the road. Luckily, or maybe not, he survived. He said the officer that first arrived on the scene introduced himself as Psy and told him that he made good on his promise. But there was no record of anyone with that name in the police report. He had lost a significant amount of blood. He had shrapnel in his heart and cuts all over his body. He lost consciousness and said he just saw black and was extremely cold until he was met by an angel who promised he would survive this. He went through several surgeries and rehab for many months. He now struggles with extreme alcoholism. He's been in and out of jail for DUIs, won't go to meetings or rehab, no longer has a driver's license, and his kids don't want anything to do with him. The story has kept me messing from anything related to a Ouija board ever. Because who knows, maybe next time the thing will make good on its promise. Backstory. Me and my best friends / roommates are in the army. We had gotten off work pretty late and decided to do a late night Waffle House run, around 11:30 p.m. or midnight. He's very religious, not in the sense that he goes to church, but in the sense that he's a real believer. He's had a lot of haunted and weird coincidental events in his life. He's like a magnet for weird spiritual events like this. I'm an atheist, at least, or so I had thought. I guess I'm agnostic now. I did not believe it. I had no experiences of my own, and unless I'm in proximity to him, I don't experience anything. On the drive over, my buddy is having a crisis of faith, and is telling me how he doesn't seem to have faith in the way he used to, and he's not sure if it's all real. I tell him that maybe he's just in a funk, and the army is getting to him. We dismiss the convo and get some breakfast. It's only us, the Waffle House crew and an old couple in the diner. We sat down and ordered. That's when things got weird. We are not approachable looking. Apparently, I always look angry, and my buddy is muscular and scary. Nobody ever goes out of their way to talk to me and my friend. But for some weird reason, this couple was doing their damnedest to initiate conversation with us. So finally we submit and start bullshitting with them. We start asking them questions in a casual manner, but mainly because we don't trust them. I get up to the jukebox and put on Rolling Stones, Sympathy for the Devil. Important. Mainly for the music, but also so I could get a better look at them. The guy is about 50 at the oldest. She's about the same. He was a young lieutenant in Vietnam. I asked him if he liked the Stones, and he goes, yeah, they're my favourite band. And then we talk about his time in Nam. But also mainly to see what does and doesn't check out, because dudes like to fake that they were in the military. And then he asks me, who sings the song that's currently on, and what's the song's name? 2 red flags show up pretty soon. I'm not buying the young lieutenant in Vietnam story because nothing he said made sense and his age didn't check out. The army jargon didn't check out, I guess is what I'm saying. So I instantly think he's lying to us in order to connect with us on, hey, I was in the army too. Second red flag. If this guy was in Vietnam, If this guy's favourite band is the Rolling Stones, he should definitely know and recognise Sympathy for the Devil. It's quintessential Vietnam era music and a Rolling Stones classic. So instantly, my buddy and I peg this couple as bullshit and begin assuming that they have an angle. Why would an older couple be out at midnight in Fayetteville, North Carolina? Not a good area. At Waffle House. Why are they trying to initiate conversation with us? And why are they lying? My buddy and I get up to leave, and they ask us to stay. We keep moving, and as we leave, the old guy grabs my arm and says, "I used to think God was a joke too." I sort of chuckled because I thought he was joking, but then I realised he's not looking at me. He's looking at my friend. Until I realised the truth. Then he lets me go, and we get out of there. It was only on the way home that my roommate put all of the points together, and he was like, "Bro, I think those guys were angels. You remember how I was telling you I was having a crisis of faith? What are the chances we meet those two weirdos doing their best impression of humans and desperately trying to engage us in conversation?" And then, that shit he said to me before we left. Those were fucking angels, bro. Last night, or this morning rather, I experienced something I can't really explain. I've always approached most things paranormal with some healthy skepticism. However, as my presence suggests, I've entertained the thought that inexplicable things likely happen to us on an everyday basis, if we're paying attention. It started out as a run-of-the-mill restless night's sleep. College, relationships, and a copious amount of masturbation and video games have truly left my sleeping schedule a wreck, to say the least. That said, waking up occasionally throughout the night is not exactly out of the ordinary for me. But last night, it was like a never-ending nightmare. Not in the sense that it was unbearable, but every time I woke up and inevitably drifted back to sleep, I'd return to the same dream. This went on for what seemed like hours until I had somehow broken the chain and found myself in a different dreamscape entirely. I don't remember much of the nightmare that preceded this moment, but this part of my dream remains crystal clear to me. I woke up in the countryside, rolling hills and grassy plains. Not too outlandish, given I live in a farm town in Ohio. But the setting was entirely unrecognisable. The rolling terrain stretched impossibly far, and the unnatural, hazy white light that coated the landscape made me feel uneasy. It was kind of like being inside of the moon in Majora's Mask. For my fellow nerds out there. At any rate, aside from the trees that dotted the landscape, the only other feature I saw was a woman standing before me. I didn't recognise her. The only quality that I can specifically remember is that she was wearing a white gown of sorts. I'm hesitant to call it a dress. It almost seemed like sleeping attire, but not anything I recognised. It's hard to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if her clothes were from a different time period. Once I had analysed my setting, I moved without thinking and approached the woman. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" I spoke, not really understanding why. She seemed to regard me for a moment before replying, not looking back to me. "I can't when she's here. Sleeping her lets her in." I can recall the pang of dread that hit me when she said this. I had absolutely no reason to assume anything was necessarily wrong. After all, the otherworldly quality of the world I was set in was giving me the slow realization that I was in a dream. But there was something off, something heavy in the air as soon as those words left her lips. I couldn't stop myself. "Is she here?" Without speaking another word, she simply pointed out across the horizon. I turned my head to look. My world came closing in. Instantly, my heart was full of bile. I couldn't breathe. That awful, nauseating feeling of fear and panic. My vision went blurry. My ears were ringing. The impossible sensation of crushing weight pressing in on my head left me reeling. I didn't hear her. I didn't see her. I'm not even sure if I felt her, but whatever presence was there was evil. Or it had evil intent at least. And then, it was over. I forced myself awake, literally gasping for breath. My head rang from fatigue and something else. The The dream felt so real. The pain certainly remained. My body felt sluggish, yet my mind was racing. I stumbled out of my room and made a beeline for the living room couch. It took me some time and an absurd amount of bright, comforting Christmas movies, but I finally calmed myself enough to ease myself into a deep, dreamless sleep. Of course, I had to tell my family as soon as I saw them. I needed to say it out loud to convince myself that I wasn't alone. But this may have been a mistake. My mom, a very witty and bubbly woman, sat in silence throughout the whole story, silently nodding or resting her hand on my shoulder in my moments of distress. But otherwise, she made no comments on my experience. Afterwards, to my horror, she described to me the woman in my dream. At our previous house, when my sister and I were toddlers, my mom had a dream of a blonde woman in a white gown who locked herself in our room. My mom recalls pounding on the door, begging and screaming for this intruder to leave her babies alone. My dad had the same dream that night. They bolted out of bed, busted our door open to find my sister and I sleeping soundly, just as they had left us. I can't decide if this was truly the same woman or not. I can't decide if she was truly evil or not. Perhaps the woman I was warned was something this lady in white had tried to protect me from as an infant. Maybe she came to me to warn me as an adult. I'm not sure. All I know is I had to get this out here. I have like 10 strange personal experiences, but this one is about my brother's experience about 12 years ago, when I was 10 years old. This happened to my brother when he was camping with my cousin in Iran's Mazandaran jungles. Let me mention it here, these jungles are the only dangerous wild animals, are only bears. There are some other wild cats and leopards, but they're rare and almost extinct, and other animals are just wild boars. And Iran has no monkeys or gorillas, so they headed to a jungle park resort. They decided to camp outside of the park's designated safe zone. At night, when he was sleeping in their tent, my brother heard some noises outside, but he ignored it. The next day in the morning they woke up. They found a big human footprint, except it had 3 sharp toes. Locals told them that it might have been a djinn. He took a photo and showed it to us when he returned. The shape of the foot was exactly like a human's, except for the toes. The toes were almost human, but a little sharper. Unfortunately, my brother never knew the importance of social media then, and the government always ignores if anything like this happens. So after a few months, he deleted the photo, and I was only a kid. I remember I was scared of camping in that park for years during family trips, but I always wish that he had kept the photo. Before me and my family moved to a newly built house, we used to live in a 25-year-old house, maybe older. I had 15 years of childhood memories there, some normal and some scary. I've seen a shadow on the wall moving towards the kitchen when I was a kid. No windows in there, and completely impossible for car lights to cast someone's shadow on the wall from the nearest window. The window was in another room. Then my keychain, which was a plastic skull thing, which had a button, and if you had to press it, it would play a laughing sound, was turned on for no apparent reason. The keychain was on the fridge. I thought my brothers were messing with me, but it was 2 a.m. and no one was there. And my mom usually saw people moving out of the door, and she said she saw my father or brother going out. But when she asked them, they said they weren't home at that time. And as a kid, I was afraid of going into the yard at night. I always felt as if something was chasing me there. We renovated the house later. The number of strange things were reduced, but never ended. My mom used to have bad dreams about the people she knew, and all of them turned true after a couple days, or on that very same day. I used to hear a glass closet door being shut, so I heard the sounds when there was no glass door, and the sounds came exactly from the bedroom where it used to be. I always had nightmares of being in a dark place with everything in slow motion. I rarely saw the dream when I got older, but I saw it once days before going to the new house. And once, a piece of bread and salt was found out of nowhere on our rooftop. There was no way for someone to throw that up because it was a 3-story house. And in my country's culture, it's believed that bread and salt is a tool of witchcraft. So fast forward, the other two freaky things happened to me was that one night I heard screams from outside. It could be my imagination. But the second one wasn't my imagination. I was on the second floor alone watching TV around 3 p.m. I was around 15 years old at the time when I heard a demonic laughter coming out of the bedroom. I immediately ran downstairs and waited until my parents returned. I never told them because I was too scared to talk about it with anyone, and I thought if I don't tell anyone, it wouldn't happen again. I invited my friend to come with me and explore an abandoned factory with me in a nearby historic city. There was only one way in, and that's through a window on the side of it by some railroad tracks. We went inside and started exploring the building, which we know gangs use as a little hideout occasionally, but that didn't deter us. Most of the inside was nothing but rubble, broken glass, and graffiti. There were letters and numbers spray painted on the wall in blue, like A15 and B7, but it was obvious a person spray painted it because it looked unprofessional. So after going around for a bit, I started to feel a heavy sense of dread. I took out my camcorder to record, but it was dead, despite charging it the night before. I'm not sure how my buddy felt because I didn't ask. We eventually get to this huge space in the basement of the place, and looking around, I saw a chair under crying eyes of blood. I assumed the eyes were spray painted, but I wasn't about to check it out. We didn't want to go near it, and my friend wouldn't enter the room at all. We left the room and went out to the courtyard, which had a broken window on a platform. We walked up the ramp to the platform and went on it, and went inside the window. Now, this was a separate building full of offices. We went down to the basement of this one, and we realised we were back in the same damn room. We turned around and walked out, and we stood at the doorway just staring at it. At the very end of the room, where the eyes and chair were, we saw a dark figure sprint from the chair to the other wall across from it, without making a single noise, and it disappeared from our view. We decided to get out right then, so we went back upstairs to climb out the window. I let my friend through first, and while I was climbing out, I heard the noise of someone walking on glass towards me. I got out, and we went back inside the main part through the courtyard. When we got inside, we were back in the basement, but in a different room. We made our way through it to reach the closet staircase to the exit, and we walked into this room. In the corner, where it's almost completely black, we found a corpse, a couple hours old by the looks of it. We just left the building and went to a local Chinese restaurant to take our mind off things. The creepier part is when I returned a few weeks later. I got lost inside there, and without realizing it, I walked into that same room with the eyes. Except I didn't recognize it because the eyes in the chair just vanished. I only realized it when I got home. A very strange thing happened to me when I was a teenager that I was thinking about recently. I live in New Mexico, and when I was 16 years old, my family took a trip to visit a Civil War battlefield. We spent the day there watching the reenactors and looking at the cannons and listening to the Historical Society members talking about the battle. For some reason, I don't remember why, we joined a group of non-Native American people to watch a Native American dance ceremony when it was dark. I remember the drums, and I remember a boy in a headdress jumping over a fire over and over again. He did it more times than I could count, running in a circle and jumping over the fire. And each time he did it, I began to feel just a bit more strange, just off. The ceremony ended and I felt dizzy and nauseous. We got into the car and began to drive off. I started to feel unbearably hot and demanded we open the windows. It was fall, so the night's air was nippy. I felt like I was choking on something, like I'd swallowed something and it was going to come out. I smelled smoke and remember talking frantically, although afterwards, none of my family recalled me acting strange. I felt like something was lodged in my throat while I burned up with a fever. My stepdad turned on the radio and AC/DC's Thunderstruck began to play. For some reason in my memory, it's just the chanting introduction to the song that played on repeat, getting louder and louder. When Brian Johnson finally said thunder, I stuck my head out the window of the car and felt like I was puking, only nothing physical came up out of me. I just remember expelling something else into the night while that AC/DC song played. I felt better, and as I looked out the window, I saw what looked like a black cloud made of dust pass over the moon. Like a shifting thing made out of the black of TV static, and it was gone. I felt fine then, having gotten whatever it was out from being inside me. I stopped feeling weird. Years later, I would see the TV show Lost, and I was deeply disturbed when I saw the smoke monster character, because whatever I saw that flew in front of the moon and seemed to have gotten inside me during the dance and been expelled from me, looked uncannily like that cloud of living black smoke made popular by that program. The other fictional thing that reminded me of what I saw was the cloud alien thing in the Mila Jovovich film, The Third Kind. The thing that carries the child out of the top floor bedroom window. It's the feeling of having something inside me that wanted and needed to get out that I remember the most. And that's a bit harder to compare to anything I've ever seen in fiction. This actually happened, and I'm not bullshitting here. Any ideas on what happened that night to me? I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. Now I'm 22. I was in my bedroom, getting ready to sleep. My mother was in the other room, waiting for my dad to come back from work. The door of my bedroom was closed. It was summer, I guess, because I remember having the windows open. The room was dark with no light, except for the moonlight and the light coming from our garden. As soon as I lay in bed, I remember I wasn't really tired. I wanted to stay with my parents. I looked towards the nearest wall, 30 centimeters from the wall, and I saw this clear figure slowly standing and looking at me. I started screaming my lungs out, and in a couple of seconds, an eternity for me, my parents get scared by the screaming. As soon as they get in, the figure disappears, and I'm looking at just the wall. I'm really scared, and I start crying, and I tell everything to my parents, who decided to call the nearest priest to bless the house and me. Anyway, I remember this figure really clearly, even though I was really, really young. The same night, I described it as an alien with a black coat, like the death. And in fact, it was this little figure, maybe 1.5 meters tall, dark green or dark grey, with a black coat on his body and a hood on his head. The eyes were long, oblique and black. I could see his face thanks to the lights coming from the windows. I remember a small mouth and that's it. The fact is that, why do I have to imagine an alien in this way? I mean, I've never seen movies with aliens in my life. I've never really been interested. And as I remember, if you ask a kid to draw an alien, he probably would draw a really tall alien, without any clothes. This is it. I don't know what to think.